Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful multiverse, and with me is the great Joan Forrest Mage of the Life Force Arts Center. Hello, Joan.
Hello, good to see you again. It's been a long time.
It has, and we have known each other for many, many years,
Yes, at least
and
20, 30,
might
maybe
be closer to 30. It's been a
30.
long time. And fans of Magic TV will actually be familiar with you because I've interviewed you in the past,
Exactly.
but it's been a few years ago, and
That
I
was
thought it would be,
2008.
that's a few years ago.
Yes, I'm almost positive because that was Lady Olivia was here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um, So let's start out with can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you do?
Yes, I do shamanic work. I'm a shamanic practitioner that in terms of oh, there's so many different things. Like we were talking a little bit before the show about the variety of experiences and the path that I've gone through to get here. If you want to say it in one word, or like what I've done in terms of spiritual work as job, right? As a
Yeah.
job, as work, it's shamanic practitioner. And when I say that, a simple explanation of what I would say shamanism is, you work with energy and with spirit guides. If you don't have those two things, it's kind of hard to call it shamanic, right?
I would agree.
And yeah, and shaman, the word shaman is actually a Tungus word from Siberia. So sometimes people think of shaman being Native American religion, but the word shaman is not from that. It's from Siberia and the Tungus people. And there was a professor of religion called Mirsu Eliade who was studying the Tungus people's religious practices in the 1940s. And he said, wow, when you look at like what they do this thing called a journey to travel to the spirit realm, and they go to the upper world, the middle world, and the lower world, and they work with energy, and they do like things like psychic surgery and they talk about the soul and recovering the soul. And he said, actually, that is very similar to a lot of religious practices, spiritual practices all over the world. And so he started writing about this and doing books about it in the academic world, and used the word shaman because that is the word, like the one who knows, I believe, is the word in the Tungus language, that phrase. And that was how the word shaman got started, how it was started to be applied to similar practices all over the world. And of course, each different culture and country has a different word for that. Like at some African tribes, it's called the Sangoma, or in Central America, the curandero or curandera, in Korea, mudang. So there's many different cultures that have words for their own word for a person who does this kind of thing.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So now, how I got started in it, well, okay, so just a brief history, my spiritual history, right?
Absolutely.
I started off being a Catholic. That's my background, and I went to Catholic grade school, high school, and college, actually. So very versed in Catholicism and the Christian, Christianity, Catholic Christianity, right? And unlike some people, I never had a problem with it. I had very good experiences, like with the nuns, and with being very sincere and very much about a loving God, that loves everyone. And there wasn't like hellfire and brimstone and things like that.
Yeah.
The however, as I got older and I just had some questions like, why did there have to be a creator? Why couldn't the universe always have been here? Or just there were certain things that bothered me, and only later as I then, well, first of all, I stopped doing Catholic practice when I got to college, and I had, you had to take theology. I went to Loyola University. And when I heard the true history of the Catholic Church as told by the Catholics, I said, who would want to belong to this organization? But I mean, of course, that's personally me, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, just, the genocide of the Native Americans, the Inquisition, the Crusades, all the ways that it got mixed up with politics and, and power and, like all this kind, like, and the, years of, even after there was a Protestant movement, there was, then, wars, religious wars in Europe over this, so anyway, I started reading the Bible on my own, and I think the teachings of Jesus are wonderful. And I think if more people really practice the teachings of Jesus, the world would be a better place. The actual teachings of Jesus, not the way it's been corrupted and twisted by, a lot of different, like Christian religions later, or more about the politics kind of thing. So then I was of course, I've been a dancer and performer since I was a child, right? I took that up when I was about 13, and that's how I got involved in the arts. That's why we still have, we have Life Force Arts Center, and I call it now Life Force Shamanic Arts and Healing, because I really got into the spiritual aspect of art and what it can mean, but anyway, in the dance company I was in at that time, a company which was in the 1980s, early 80s, I've been dancing over 50 years, right? And one of the things that a big thing for me was when I was like 17, I injured my back and I couldn't dance. And I had a doctor, of course, at that time, there was no such thing as like exercise physiology. Chiropractors were quacks. Alternative healing was, like, there's no such thing. I mean, not no such thing, but it was, don't ever go to an alternative healer. They don't know anything, and so, but I had a doctor tell me, well, your back doesn't seem very strong, so you probably should not dance anymore. And I just said, this makes no sense to me, right?
Yeah.
There's got to be a way for me to do this, to overcome this problem. So I did. My sister was a naturopath. She was in naturopathy school. She was a classmate of Dawn Silver, who was the owner of Healing Earth Resources, yeah, and here in Chicago. And so she said, well, chiropractic is really good. A lot of people believe in that. So I went there, and it was life-changing, and I was able to heal through that. In the meantime, also I had the doctors had given, I went to a couple doctors. They had given me things like Soma tablets and Valium and butazolidine, anti-inflammatory things like that. And it just it didn't do anything for me. After a while, I could take like double, triple the pills, and it had no effect on me whatsoever. I said, no, I'm not going to deal with this. Just threw them all away, you know. So this is the background. I've always been taught in my family to think for myself, right?
That's very
You know,
important.
yeah. And that, you know, your body is healthy, your mind is healthy. You know, like health is normal.
Yes.
You know, it's not, you know, you want to keep in balance, kind of like the more Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic, all these traditional medicines say, you know, it's about balance. Everything is about balance, right? You know, when you're starting to get off balance, you want to pull yourself back on. You don't want to get so far off balance that, you know, you need desperate intervention,
Yes.
right? And so that is my whole philosophy too. I mean, I think it's important to say this because if you look at what I've done, that's the core of it, right? So that I was in a dance company, and one of the other dancers introduced me to Buddhism, the Soka Gakkai International, chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, right? And that answered a lot of my questions that I had about, for one thing, personal connection to the divine, you know, that you don't need an intermediary. You draw forth your own Buddha nature, your own divine nature. And here is a practice that can help you do that. So we chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo to what we call the object of worship, which is called the Gohonzon, which has, it's a scroll that has Chinese writing on it that the original founder of this, Nichiren Daishonin, in the 13th century Japan created. So he actually was a reformer of Buddhism, because by the time Buddhism started, you know, like about 3000 BC, and it spread from India, the original Shakyamuni Buddha, to China and then to Japan. And by the time you get to Nichiren Daishonin in the Middle Ages in Japan, again, it was very corrupted by the, you know, like the priests were expected, and people were in parishes of the temples, and basically it was so they could collect taxes, you know, things like that. And Nichiren Daishonin was no, you know, the religion is supposed to help people, and it's supposed to empower people and to be able to connect to the divine themselves, to solve their problems, you know, to do good in the world, you know, like this kind of thing. And it's not about being reliant on some power outside yourself. You know, the power is within you. So whatever is that divine thing is within you, is the message. So I practiced that for years and years, and that was the, I still practice it actually. And that is because it works. It works for me, right? And I've seen it work for thousands of people over the years. And also I was a leader in the organization for many years, and I held these chanting sessions and meetings at my home. The SGI is organized in what are called districts, which there's our individual, you know, like neighborhood groups, like maybe of about 40 people. It's all volunteer, and there's millions of people throughout the world. It's in almost every country in the world. And so, especially in the 1980s, we would travel literally all over the world. Like I went to Japan and we would do these things called culture festivals. And so that was giant pageants with thousands of people. Like the one that I went to in Japan, there were 20,000 people in the show, and it was held at the Olympic Stadium.
Wow.
You know, yeah.
That's impressive.
And that was 1983. Yeah. Also there were a lot of different culture festivals in the United States that I went to, that I performed in, because there was, they would always have something with music, with dance, and so I would be part of that. So, you know, all of that was really wonderful. That was a lot of my pastoral training. So that was a lot of training, like, how do you help people through crises? How do you encourage people to practice a religious practice? You know, how
Mhm.
do you understand the religion? You know, like, do you understand the background, the history, you know, all of, and why we do this practice and why you personally do this practice? So all of those kind of things are how do you get along with other people? You know, like other leaders, because you would have a team of leaders, and how do you, you know, work together with them to encourage people, or, you know, all the things about, you know, holding a meeting, right? Every week you have a meeting and you have to plan it. And you know, all that, you know,
Yeah,
anything like that that happens with organizations, and especially volunteer spiritual organizations, right?
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So, and then of course, there also are like community centers and culture centers that the SGI operates too, that are like in Chicago here, we have the, you know, the SGI Culture Center, which is, or I think they call it now the Buddhist Center. You know, and so that's a large building with a parking lot and, you know, like all that kind of stuff. But, you know, the heart of it is really the districts too. So anyway, I was practicing that. I was practicing my dance, and I was in several different dance companies, performance art, you know, things like that. We're talking about until like 1986, right?
Hmm.
And so from you know, 79 to 86, more like 85, actually. I was, you know, doing these performances, really involved with the SGI Buddhist. And let's see. So then I said, okay, I was 29 years old. And I said, this is the point as a performer, right? As a dancer, especially, that you make a choice. Like, are you going to there sort of isn't, for modern dance performance art thing, there isn't like a job that you go and you get,
Hmm.
you know. So either you, so up until then, you're somebody else's dancer, and you're learning the ropes, and you're practicing, and, you know, having that experience and like that kind of thing. But then you either have to start your own company, teach maybe the stuff you already know, but even with that, you need a following. Like, you don't just go and get a job. I mean, sometimes at that point, at least, you could maybe get a job like teaching at a college or something.
Hmm.
You know, like, say if you had a master's degree, right? I said, what I really feel in my heart, and I chanted a lot about this, right? I prayed a
Hmm.
lot about this, like, what should I do? And one of the vows that I made was to create Kozen Rufu, which is one way of describing that is like world peace through dance for the 21st century, right? Little did I know that it would be the 21st century before, because we're talking 1985,
Yeah.
before this actually manifests.
Well, you know, that's an interesting point, because sometimes we choose what we want to do, and it comes in
Yes,
its own time.
yes. And so I said, well, the interesting thing to me, well, why don't I start with improvisation, teaching and practicing dance improvisation? And I said, okay, so what's going to be the structure of that improvisation? And I said, the interesting thing to me about watching people improvise is how they relate to each other. And so from that, I said, there are 4 different ways that I see people relate to each other when they improvise. They dance by themselves, they lead and follow, like mirroring. They interact or they move with a common form and energy. And I called that streaming, osmosis, dialogue, and crystallizing. And everything I have ever done since 1985 is based in that. I have not done anything else other than try to clarify those things. And I will show you the wheel here. So this is the life force, it actually life force wisdom wheel is what I call it now. And you will see streaming, osmosis, I'll make it a little bit smaller. Streaming, osmosis, dialogue, and crystallizing. So it's still there, but everything else is lots of other stuff that I figured out in the last 35 years, 40 years. And that's what I do.
Cool. And
that's what I've always done. And I knew that it would take a long time, you know, and at a certain point, maybe about 15 years ago, my guide said, your work is for after the cataclysm. You're, you know, like, you're not supposed to be like, say, just introducing people to things, or a lot of the, like, for example, in the early 90s, right, when I was, so when I started doing that, all of a sudden, people would run screaming from the room and have breakdowns and breakthroughs and have to go to therapists for months after coming to my classes or performances.
Oh my goodness.
Oh yes, big time. And I realized I knew enough about life and about the arts and about dance in particular and the body, because remember back to my early years where I couldn't dance. And one of the things I found out was that it had a lot to do with tension, with emotional tension, why I was having problems with my back, right? Yeah. And so I realized that I wasn't doing anything wrong, I was doing something right. I was doing something that was very cathartic. Really, as several people have noted in like testimonials about the performances and classes, like, this is work that rips out your innards.
Yes.
So it's, you know, in a lot of ways, I wish I was, you know, a simple, easy, pretty, the stuff that I do, but it's not. It's about truth. It's about healing. It's about, and of course, that's an aspect of shamanism also, that it's not just all love and light and let's be calm or something like that. No, it acknowledges, you know, the dark side, the shadow side, you know, also within this greater understanding of wholeness and unity.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So then okay, 1985, I realized this, that what I'm doing is very powerful. By the way, I realized at a certain point that after I started practicing Buddhism, I realized the problem that I had with Christianity and Catholicism. Again, this is a personal thing, right? I'm not saying anything if people like to, or they, you know, get a lot out of it and that's what they believe. That in a lot of ways, a lot of religions, not just Christianity, but a lot of different religions, they're about actually disempowering you. They're about making you helpless. Yeah. And it's not about what is the how to connect to the power that there is in the universe. And so it's about, you know, how to trust yourself. You got to trust yourself, you know, or find some way, find that wisdom somehow, somewhere,
Yeah.
that you feel like you're on the right path. You know, and even if you're on the wrong path, then take responsibility for it.
Yeah,
You know, I mean, because
absolutely.
honestly, there are people like that, but don't deny what you're doing. Just
Mhm.
say what it is, you know. Um, anyway, that was how 1985, I said, I need to understand what is this power that's coming through me. I have a
Mhm.
choice. Um, I can either say I'm the kind of artist that takes no responsibility for the reaction of my audiences, or I can be the kind of person that understands what is this power that's coming through me. Another choice, actually, the third choice would be to never dance again
Mhm.
because I'm too afraid of the power that's, you know,
Yeah,
that's coming, that's happening.
that would be a choice. Yes.
Yeah, you know, and actually it's been very interesting because over the years I've met people like that.
Yeah, I've met a
They,
lot of those as well.
yes, especially in the arts, you know,
Mhm.
in the arts, like I can't handle what, you know, when I perform or when I teach, like what's happening to people. So they go into something else. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if
Mm.
they're honest with themselves and they've examined it, they understand that, you
Yeah.
know. And again, I don't, one important thing that I've learned is not to judge people,
Mhm.
you know.
Very
A thing,
important.
yes, a thing. So it's like whatever choices they made, I have my own opinion of what they're doing, you know, but they have to, you know, they have to decide.
Mhm.
And that's a spirit that I bring into all of my work. Yeah.
I think that's very good.
Yeah. So in 1985, I said, I am going to find out what is this power that's coming through me. And so that led me into other kinds of spiritual practices.
Yeah.
So I studied all kinds of things, you know, like, you know, the shamanism, energy work. I briefly went to the Columbia College dance therapy program, and I realized that the Western version of therapy did not encompass what I was doing, that I was doing energy work, you
Mhm.
know, and different kinds of pagan groups, you know, also places like Healing Earth Resources, Infinity Foundation, Oasis Center here in Chicago, you know, so, and anyway, just all kinds of different things. And by the end of that, in about 1995, I said, the best thing you could call me is a shaman. And I asked my guides at that point, you know, do I call myself a shaman because I don't want to be misappropriating a cult, you know, indigenous
Mhm.
culture or something like that? And they said, don't worry about what you're called, just do the work. We're handing it to you on a silver platter, right?
There you
So
go.
I was already given streaming osmosis dialogue and crystallizing, and that clearly I was supposed to keep working on that and understanding that. Through this time, I also understood that you know, it's like a medicine wheel. I call it a wisdom wheel to differentiate it from something that sounds more Native American or
Mhm.
something like that, because it doesn't come from an indigenous culture directly. It comes from the arts.
Mhm.
It comes from the human body and human relationship, like directly there. And as you will notice also in the wisdom wheel,
Mhm.
um, that it talks about the self, society, nature, and the spirit. And
Yeah.
it talks about, like, say, the self and then also the sovereign. At first, you may know that a lot of medicine wheels are 4 parts. They only show 4 parts, 4 quadrants, right? Like that.
Yes.
And what the guides kept telling me is, well, there's also the center of the wheel is the true self, right? And of course, a lot of this is also from all the different things that I've studied and like that kind of thing, like Buddhism and Christianity and whatever. I always knew that this is a modern medicine wheel, a modern wisdom wheel, so that it doesn't come from, one particular culture, but it's meant to be. I always say that it's kind of like Eckhart Tolle with The Power of Now. The Power of Now, if you look at that book, it says nothing original. There's not one thing in there that's original. But what he did was he really lived that, and he put it down in one book for that time. And so that's why it became an incredible opening for people, right?
Absolutely.
So, what?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, there was that idea. I looked at a lot of different medicine wheels, like, for example, I think it's Robert Moore is his name, who the men's movement, and he was talking about there's the four archetypes are the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. And that felt really like that's something that needed to be embodied here. So you notice that there are the different archetypes, right? And when I got to like the king, I said, why don't I call it the sovereign so that it's gender neutral, could be either man or woman. And I said to the guides, this is an odd word. We're talking 1995, right? I said, this is a really odd kind of archaic word. Do I need to use this? They go, yes. So you know what? And of course, Sentience Inc. was the original name of Life Force, Life Force Arts Foundation. Because back in 1988, when I started the corporation, nonprofit tax exempt corporation, as a performing group, right? I said, I want to teach people about being alive, feeling, and conscious. That's what the word sentient means. Alive, feeling, and conscious in the body, right? The connection of the body and the consciousness. So sometimes people think of sentient being as meaning aware of being alive or, something like that. But it's more than just consciousness. It's being in the body and relating to these other things, society, nature, and spirit. Within the self. So, so fast forward to about 5 years ago, suddenly everybody's talking about sentience and sovereignty.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
this is
for
what
example,
Spirit does.
What?
This is what Spirit does, is it brings us there before it's even there.
Oh, absolutely. And I've always known that about this work. It's like, I'm here for the ride. I'm doing the work. I'm doing everything I possibly can to bring this out and to really understand it and to be able to pass it on. So, so I think that's, and then so for about the first 20 years, I did not have a space. From 1988 to 2008, I worked in other people's spaces and taught workshops. And, again, from 1985, I had this system. And I kept, understanding it more and more and more. So it wasn't like but I studied with a lot of different teachers and things. But it was very clear to me that I was supposed to develop this work, not just teach somebody else's work. In the middle of all that, later, 98 was when I met Dina Buddha and the Fellowship of Isis. And so got involved with Fellowship of Isis and the festivals, the Goddess Festival, and Lady Olivia, Dina and Olivia, amazing mentors.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Of they walk the talk, you know, they
Very
really,
much so.
yeah. And to me, that's an important thing about whatever religion you're in or spiritual practice, you know, are you actually doing it? It's not fluffy.
Yeah.
You know, I love that that poem, The Invitation by Oriah
Mhm.
Mountain Dreamer, if you've heard that one.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
beautiful.
it's yeah, where it says, what sustains you when all else falls away? You
Mhm.
know, from do you like the company you keep in the quiet moments? Yeah,
And that's very, very important.
yeah.
I mean, it is
So
the essence of the thing.
yeah. And
So,
the you know, I became a priestess of
mhm.
the FOI. I was invited by Lady Olivia to do that. And then in 2008, opened my own space, Life Force Arts Center. 1999 was when I changed the name to Life Force rather than Sentience,
Mhm.
because it really felt like it had a bigger mission than just teaching. There's more, it's not just about being alive, feeling and conscious in your body
Mhm.
as an individual, but it's about the whole life force and how it works with the individual and the community balancing each other.
Yes. So
So
could you tell
anyway,
us, well,
yeah,
tell
go
us
ahead.
about what you do with the Life Force Arts Center?
Well,
Or
it's that too has been an evolution. So you know, of course, there always was the idea of a place for me to practice. I teach
Mhm.
the shamanic training program, which I founded in 2001. So it's like a year-long program of teaching people these shamanic practices. And also continue to do performances and have a performing group and that. And then in 2008, when I started, I said, you know, why don't I also have other people come in as a center? Because at that time, two big organizations had folded
Mhm.
in Chicago, like Healing Earth Resources and also Transitions Bookstore.
Yes.
That, you know, were places that people could go to do like these kind of alternate spiritual practices. And so that was part of the inspiration to start the center. And
Mhm.
again, that was a very interesting thing because I had actually gotten a master's degree starting in 2001 to 2003. I graduated from DePaul University, the School for New Learning, it was called at that time, alternative education, where you design your own program.
Mhm.
So it was a professional uh, MAPS, Master of Arts in Applied Professional Studies. So you study what you do as a profession, and you
Okay.
get a master's in that. So I thought about going to school for like, say, a psychology and
Mhm.
getting like a license, you know, as a social worker or, you know, something LPC, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And I thought, you know, what I do doesn't really fit in with that. I mean, like, all learning is important, it's useful, but
Yeah.
for me to go for 2 years to learn to do that type of like talk therapy or something, it's
Mhm.
like I'm already doing my own whole practice. So why don't
Yeah.
I do this other, you know, alternative school? And so I thought, oh, maybe I'll be able to teach at a college, you know, find some college that would
Mhm.
accept my program that I do. And then it's a long story. I actually tried that at Columbia College and like it didn't work, which is a long story.
Mhm.
I mean, I proposed it or like,
Yeah.
I realized from the things that they were saying, even in the proposal, that it wasn't going to work out. And I thought, even in the most artsy alternative school, this is too different. For me to really bring forth the spiritual and the artistic aspect that I am, I need to be on my own, not trying to get it into a college.
Yes.
So then several years later, I said, okay, what do I do? And the guide said, open your own space. And I was like, you must be crazy. Because spaces like this open and shut, and it's hard to sustain them. And they said, do this now, we will not let you fail. And that was in the spring of 2008. And I said, okay. And all of a sudden, I was able to raise a whole bunch of money. And we were opening in October. I found the space in September of 2008. And the day I was going to sign the lease, which was September 15th of 2008, which was just before a Mercury retrograde. So I said, well, I better sign the lease before the Mercury retrograde. And I turn on the radio in the morning and it says, Lehman Brothers is closing and we don't know if there will be a US economy by 5 p.m. today. Yeah. And I said, okay, I went and I chanted and I said, okay, this either means I should not do this or it means I should definitely do it. So which one is it? So it was definitely do it. So we started smack dab on the recession of 2008, October, right? And it's been very difficult, but always like getting through. Yeah. So that it says to me there needs, this was needed. Absolutely. So for the first 8 years, from 2008 to 2016, I put a lot of emphasis on being the host of a lot of different people in addition to doing my own work. So it was like for the community to come, it was more along the model of a place like Healing Earth Resources or Transitions Bookstore, where, it's a place where all kinds of interesting people doing interesting things, especially basically spiritual work and the cross section of art and spirituality and healing. In addition, I kept seeing like my own clients here for doing things like soul retrieval and all of that, and the shamanic training program and that. And then in 2016, I said, I'm not making progress on, like, say, writing the book about the wheel and all of this kind of stuff. So 2016, I started turning things around and having Life Force Arts Center be more about the work that I do. And so that's where we're at,
Most
with
excellent.
that.
So if people wanted to learn more about the center and more about you, where would you send them?
To lifeforcearts.org.
Very good.
That's our a website. We're also on Facebook, and we're redoing our website and all kinds of things with the idea Life Force Shamanic Arts and Healing.
Wonderful. And we're nearly at the end of our hour, but we wanted to talk a little bit about Lady Dina and the Fellowship of Isis. We were talking before we came on. Yeah. And you wanted to talk in particular about her library.
Yes. So Dina passed away in 2013. And she had an incredible library of spiritual books. Yes. And also, she was a librarian. She actually, that was her profession of being a librarian. And now Demetria Nanos has those books. And there's something like 2,000 volumes, and Demetria and I have talked off and on about a need to have a spiritual library.
Mm-hmm.
And because many of us, I'm sure a lot of places in the country and the world, for example, have books from the 1980s, 1970s, whenever, that, spiritual books that are out of print.
Yeah.
Like, I know I have like at least 100 books in the basement here of Life Force that, because it's too much for where I live, my
Yeah.
apartment, that this should be available to people.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that I've always thought is we really need an actual library with a librarian, because of, and preferably even something where it can be digitized as
Mm-hmm.
well, so those are the thoughts that I have had.
That's wonderful. I would love to see that come to pass.
Yeah, it's one thing I've thought of is having a, you would kind of need a committee at least of people to actually do this and to find a place, like, basically you need to raise funds to have a space that could actually do this. I mean, unless you gave it to some other library or in
And
existence.
that would be a whole different thing.
And that's a whole different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I certainly hope to see that come to pass in the future.
Mhm. It's good to, keep that, that thought in mind and intention.
Well, thank you so much for this interview, Joan. It's been wonderful. It's wonderful to see you again after so long. And we've come to the end of our hour, more or less. And I want to thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for watching. And we'll have another interview with another fascinating person next week. And until next time, may you blessed be.
Blessed be.